Welcome to Sykes Peak. Join us as we speak with experts, share inspiring stories, and provide actionable advice to help you reach your psychological peak. So get ready to embark on a journey of self-discovery, growth, and empowerment. So we're doing part 3 of this series on boundaries, and in this one, we want to talk about what happens or how to set boundaries and appropriate boundaries, and when to set appropriate boundaries. Sean, what are your thoughts on how to set boundaries?
It's a great question.
You sound like those people in the Senate. Thank you, Senator, for that question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can find a vague enough answer to respond with. You know, as a parent, there were times when I struggled with knowing the right time or the right method. But I do know that I remember some key advice I'd picked up on from various people wiser than me. One was always be careful to make sure that the boundary and limitation wasn't about your preference, your needs, as much as trying to think for my child, what was his needs, what were his issues, what level was he at. If they're 4, they're not going to understand these harder, heavier concepts, and you really have to kind of know that range and where you're at with your child and their development. But if you're angry, if you're upset because you've been triggered by something, that's not something you want to pass into your child to make them feel that they're the responsible factor for your comfortability. So that was something that I tried to focus on as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the older I get, and hopefully wiser, the more I've been paying attention to the concept, I think how kind of God does with us as an invitation for truth. And by highlighting those, realities for us that, okay, do you see that you stepped out of bounds on this one? Can you see the path of your life and where it led you? But inviting them into that conversation of truth and honesty, like you said, of removing those barriers and building that trust in that relationship, so they know that this isn't about infringement and restriction, and that this is about guidance.
Mm-hmm. That's probably the best point. And once again, understanding your child's level of understanding. You're the adult. You have to step back and say that not everything that they're doing is a rebellious act on their part. Now, you may say, don't do this, and they go ahead and do it. When that happens,
yes,
then there needs to be a consequence.
Yes.
But if they're doing the discovery aspect of it while you're not looking, okay, because you need to be monitoring the 2-year-old, most all the time, at least have them in your sights. But if you're monitoring them, and you can allow them to do the discovery, if you know that it's not going to be hurtful, because they may be trying to learn how to balance something on top of something that's wobbly, that's full of water, and you step back and you go, no, let's just watch what's going to happen here,
right.
Because that's going to fall over, and hopefully in your mind, you're thinking, I hope that it falls over on them and gets them wet,
Yes.
Because if they get wet,
Absolutely.
It's no big deal, but...
now, if they're doing this next to an electrical outlet...
Yeah.
Well, then...
You say no.
Right.
And if they're doing it to try to get someone else wet,
Yes.
you got to set that limit too, because you can't allow them to, because that's just the deviousness of mankind. That's why, that's part of our human nature, is to be evil, and we've got to train that out of them. God did the same thing. He said, I've got 10 rules that I want you to follow.
Yeah.
And then Moses came up and he said, I've got a whole book of rules I want you to follow. Because people would say, well, that's not in the 10 Commandments, and so Moses had to, he had to establish rules. Otherwise, they would have continued to live in chaos and continued to be swallowed up in the ground and continued to be they'd still be walking.
Right.
Okay. So it's
and kids will do that. They'll nitpick at a rule. Well, that's not what you said.
right.
That's not how. Yeah. And I work mostly with teens, and listen, my heart goes out to teens because it's a troubling time for them, because they're halfway between young child and adult, and so they have these adult bodies, and adults look at them and go, why aren't you thinking like adult level? Why aren't you operating at the same level I am?
Right.
And I think you're right. Like, we forget they are still in a childlike mentality. Just because they've gone through a rapid growth spurt doesn't mean that they've emotionally or mentally matured in that same rapid nature. And it can be very challenging for them. Plus you got hormones and social pressures and everything else. But
well, I mean, that's where we get the rules that say, on a plastic bag, this is not a toy.
Yeah.
Or I remember, fireworks. As a kid, there were rules with fireworks.
Yeah.
And the rules were light it and get away.
We didn't have them.
Well, we didn't either. That was the rule, and I didn't say that I followed the rule, but that was the rule.
Right.
I mean, we had bottle rocket fights. I mean,
Oh yeah.
but we were hiding behind things, shooting bottle rockets at each other.
Sure.
And we would do it about the length of the distance that a bottle rocket would have any kind of effect. But when it gets to its destination, it blows up. Yeah. So, but we, now I'm not saying that, we followed every rule.
Sure.
But what we did was we set boundaries, in that rule breaking aspect, So once again, knowing the level of understanding that your child has.
Absolutely.
So it's going to be different at 4 than what it was at 2.
Yes.
At 6 than what it was at 4.
Right.
I asked my my college freshmen when they come in, we'll be talking about in general psychology class when we get to a point where we talk about human sexuality. It's just one chapter out of the textbook, but we'll talk about it, and I'll ask them, what do you know now that you didn't know 4 years ago? Or have you changed as an 18-year-old than what you were as a 14-year-old? I mean, they start looking back real quick. And that's just 4 years. That's not, 40 years.
Right.
40 years, you usually forget what you learned when you were in your 20s, so when you're in your 60s. Yeah. Or what were we talking about again? Yeah. But the time frame for kids from 2 to 6,
yes.
That 4 years, just think about all that's learned in that 4 years. I mean, and that's why we call them formative years.
Yes.
Freud used to say that your personality, 80% of your personality, 85, I think is what it was, 85% of your personality was developed in the first 5 years. Well, now you think about what's happened in a 5-year-old that's gone through divorce.
Yes.
There's a lot of mistrust that's developed in that period of time. Well, that gets banked that gets pushed back in that subconscious that they have. And that comes out when they're adults, when they get into a relationship.
I imagine it like a cupcake. Those, and you got the batter, but you bake it, and it's in there. It's solid. You can't change that.
Yeah.
It's done.
Whatever you can bake in, baked in.
You can throw a different topping on when they're a teenager and in their 20s. You can put sprinkles on top, but that baking, that's done.
Right. And I think in our prep sessions we talked about. I believe this is what we talked about, but
cupcakes.
We said no, not cupcakes. But a muffin would probably be a better.
There's nothing better than a muffin.
Yeah, I know, because you can put all kinds of stuff in muffins.
Seriously.
But one of the things that that I mentioned was what you wear around the house to teach modesty. And I know my daughter and I go back and forth about who's responsible for how they look at another human being. But I would say I agree with that, but you're also responsible for how much you allow the other human being to see. So, what you're dressing in needs to be somewhat modest. I see kids and it's mostly girls, because if you look at a teenage guy, wear a t-shirt and a pair of gym shorts, no big deal. But a teenage girl is wearing a tank top, and that's form-fitting. It's not a loose-fitting t-shirt, and they're wearing their gym shorts are not like boy gym shorts. They're wearing more like a volleyball type, kind of shorts. I don't want to sound like some creepy old guy, but what happens is that there's nothing left to imagination.
Yes.
So teaching your children, setting the boundaries at home, to begin with, like, nobody's walking around this house in their underwear. You stay in your room until you're dressed, and then you can come out into the rest of the house.
Do you think that it would equally be an equal measure would be that modesty is to women as civility is for men, or respectability?
Respectability. Yeah, I would go for that. And which is something that as a man, I try to teach my son. You have total respect for women. And the thing is, and I didn't just teach him this. I would have opportunities sometimes to go to the middle school, and they would have these.
To middle school one.
I know. You go to the middle school to speak. Let me put it, middle school and high school to speak, because they would have these special events where they would have people from the community go in and answer questions from kids and that sort of thing. And I remember one part of what I would do is I would teach the boys. I would say to the boys specifically, you are responsible for the protection of your female classmates. Excuse me. And that it doesn't just start now, but it continues on through high school and into college. Your responsibility is to be respectful and protective of all females.
Right.
And that's something that you need to know and understand. If you haven't been taught that, then you've been taught wrong. Now, once again, I come from a biblical perspective that, you respect women. And, and I see that in the way that Jesus dealt with the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman. She even asked the question, why are you talking to me? Why, because Jewish men, the ones from Jerusalem, like yourself, and he was a Galilean, but, Jewish men don't talk to a Samaritan woman, don't talk to a woman, period. So the culture, like you said, but he did it with compassion. He did it with care and concern. He didn't do it out of lust or, with some hidden agenda that he might have with her. Well, the hidden agenda was he was revealing to her that I'm the one that you're seeking. I'm the Messiah, and I'm he. This is what he says to her. And the idea is that becomes a standard for me in how to treat women.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a valuable point for young males to learn. And it was important for me as a father to teach my son. Now, I didn't teach my son only this is how you're supposed to be, respecting women and respecting females, but I was teaching my daughters at the same time, this is what you expect from males.
From men, yeah.
And that if any male treats you any differently, then you need to remove yourself from their company.
And we're looking at what is best, right? We're not trying to answer every question about every boundary with it, what is or isn't within limitation. It's about what is best here.
Right.
Do you want your daughters to be modest? Do you want your sons to be respectful? If so, then where are your boundaries? Being intentional with those to create that in them as adults.
Well, it's not only, and see, we had the conversation about consistency early on. It's not just teach them to be this way, but you have to be this way as well.
That was,
so yeah,
back to that.
Because it's more, it's not just do as I say, it's do as I do.
Yeah.
And so, boy, I tell you what, there's a lot to say on these things. So we had to break this one up into another session. Listen to that one now.